They thought it would be a simple photo op, a rain-soaked archway, a few foreign guests, a ceremonial guard for show. But when Queen Camilla ordered him to move, when she spat in his face thinking silence meant submission, she didn't expect what came next, because that guard didn't flinch. He turned his back on her, and in front of ministers, cameras, and history itself, the monarchy had to choose. Now, before we show you the moment King Charles walked into the courtyard and made a decision no one saw coming, drop a comment telling us where in the world you're watching from. Tap subscribe with the bell icon turned on. And swool right here, because this story isn't about defiance. It's about discipline that wouldn't bow. The stones in Windsor's North Quadrangle were slick with drizzle that morning, the kind of English rain that doesn't announce itself, just settles in and makes everything damp. Boots left faint prints on the slate. The archway cast a long shadow across the courtyard, and beneath it stood a figure who hadn't moved in 2 hours. Sergeant Thorne Marlowe, Coldstream Guards. 36 years old, clean-shaven, built lean from years of service that had nothing to do with ceremony. His scarlet tunic was immaculate, gold buttons catching what little light broke through the clouds, white strap crossing his chest like a line drawn with a ruler. The bearskin sat centered above eyes that looked straight ahead and saw everything. Most people who passed him saw a uniform. What they missed was the medal ribbon tucked beneath the strap, awarded after a classified operation in Kandahar, where staying silent and holding position had saved more lives than anyone would ever read about in the papers. Behind the archway, the inner courtyard was buzzing with the kind of controlled chaos that preceded royal photo opportunities. Camera tripods being adjusted, PR staff murmuring into earpieces, communications officers checking angles. This wasn't a state ceremony. Nothing was being signed today. But the guests arriving carried weight that didn't need formal titles to announce itself. A black Bentley rolled to a stop near the entrance, rear door opened by a gloved aide before the engine even quieted. Queen Camilla stepped out first, pearl earrings, storm grey coat dress, the practiced expression of someone who'd learned to balance charm and authority in rooms where both mattered. 2 figures followed her out. Lord Havisham, senior advisor on foreign policy. The kind of man whose posture suggested decades spent navigating conversations where one wrong word could end careers. And Minister Raina Patel, culture secretary, younger, sharper-eyed, the sort who wanted to be seen standing near power because proximity looked good in future campaign materials. They were here for optics. A soft launch of something called Monarchy in Partnership, one of those Commonwealth-facing initiatives, designed to show the Crown playing nice with Parliament on culture and diplomacy. Nothing binding, nothing controversial, just photo opportunities and carefully worded remarks about shared values. But Camilla didn't look at the cameras first. Her eyes went straight to the scarlet figure standing motionless beneath the arch. Rain flecked his shoulder. A photographer's flash pulsed once, and her expression, just for a second, showed something that wasn't quite irritation, but was heading that direction. "Good morning, Sergeant," she called out, the words carrying that particular upper-class lilt that turned statements into performances. No response. He couldn't respond, not while posted. She took a step closer, smiling now for the lenses that were starting to turn their way. "At least smile for the cameras, Sergeant. You're not actually a statue." Nothing. Not a flicker. A camera shutter clicked somewhere behind the press line. One of the aides shifted his weight uncomfortably. Camilla's smile held, but something behind it tightened. Very composed, aren't we?" Lord Havisham glanced sideways, lowering his voice. "Bearing is tradition, Your Majesty. They're not meant to speak on post." "Yes," she said, adjusting the lapel of her coat with more force than necessary. "But we are meant to be approachable." Behind them, photographers started positioning themselves for the formal line. The guard remained silent. The rain kept falling, and the tension, quiet, almost invisible, had already started building. Under the archway, The drizzle thinned slightly, but never quite stopped. Beyond the stone entrance, the ceremonial square opened up, flanked by more guards in formation, all of them as motionless as statues, all of them just as wet. But it was Marlowe, positioned dead center under the arch, who kept drawing the cameras. The photo line had been planned down to the second. Commonwealth flags positioned on either side, cultural banners arranged just so behind the podium steps. Camilla had personally signed off on the speaker order, the sequence of remarks, even the colour balance of the backdrop. But the guard, he was supposed to be decoration, background, a visual reminder of tradition that didn't actually do anything except stand there and look impressive. She stepped toward him again, flanked now by Havisham and Minister Patel, who had started up one of those low, staged conversations about modernization through heritage that sounded rehearsed because it was. "Perhaps we should start with something softer," Camilla said lightly, making a loose gesture with her gloved hand. "Nothing too formal, just us and the guard, visible continuity, that sort of thing." The PR aide blinked. "Ma'am?" She turned toward the cameras, voice brightening for the microphones. "A portrait of monarchy and service. The sergeant can stand at a slight angle, perhaps lower the rifle a touch, make it less severe." Another aide hesitated, glancing at his clipboard like it might contain an answer. "Your Majesty, I believe ceremonial arms protocol requires the rifle to remain grounded while on active post." "Oh, come now," she said, sweetness layered over steel. "Even soldiers must adapt to modern optics." Lord Havisham chuckled. "Awkward, obligatory. Quite right. We're all adjusting these days, aren't we?" But Marlowe didn't adjust. The cameras clicked anyway. One photographer crouched low, catching the contrast between her gloved hand, gesturing toward the guard, and his absolute refusal to acknowledge it. The image would end up on a photo editor's desk within the hour, flagged with a yellow sticky note. "Tension here." Camilla turned slightly, holding her smile just long enough for the flashes to finish. But when she lowered her hand, something in her posture had changed. Stiffer, less fluid. Minister Patel glanced between them, half smiling. "He really is very still." "They're trained that way," Camilla said flatly, "though a bit of warmth never hurt a uniform." Marlowe didn't move, didn't blink, didn't give her a single thing to work with. A second aide approached, clipboard now clutched like a shield. "Ma'am, protocol for Coldstream guards on ceremonial post actually prohibits rifle adjustment or body shift without direct command from the officer of the guard." "And who," Camilla asked, voice cooling, "is the officer of the guard?" "Currently Major Townsend, but he's stationed at the southern wing." "Then summon him." "Shall I radio—" "No!" The word came too fast. She caught herself, smoothing her tone back into something resembling patience. "No, never mind. Let's just carry on." She stepped back, fingers finding the pearl pin at her collar, and adjusting it, even though it didn't need adjusting. The press line reformed around her, and the event moved forward. But behind the practiced expressions and the diplomatic small talk, her jaw was set tight. She had gestured. She had offered the image, modern monarchy, accessible and warm. And that guard had left her standing there, looking foolish in front of cabinet ministers and half the diplomatic press corps. Cameras don't capture sound, but they capture posture. And that image, the Queen Consort smiling beside a soldier who hadn't shifted so much as an inch, was already being attached to emails with subject lines like "awkward moment at Windsor" and "Camilla guard tension." The humiliation was subtle. But to Camilla, standing there with rain soaking into the hem of her coat, it was anything but subtle. And she wasn't the type to let things go. The interior doors opened with the kind of ceremonial grace that made everything feel choreographed, which it was. The delegation began filtering toward the central exhibition hall, a long corridor lined with oil portraits and the faint smell of furniture polish and centuries. Camilla led the way, heels tapping a deliberate rhythm against stone floors worn smooth by generations of footsteps. Aides and guests followed at the carefully calculated distance that protocol required, but she didn't get far. Just before reaching the velvet rope entrance to the exhibition space, she stopped. Not a gradual pause, a full stop. Then she turned. The rest of the group hesitated, uncertain whether this was planned or something else. She was looking back toward the archway, toward the guard who still hadn't moved. Sergeant Marlowe stood exactly where he'd been standing for the past 2.5 hours, rifle grounded, shoulders square, face unreadable beneath the tall bearskin. The drizzle had eased slightly, but water still clung to his shoulder strap in tiny beads. He looked like he'd been carved into the palace itself. Camilla's voice came out lighter than before, but there was something false in the brightness. "Tell me, Sergeant, do you take orders only from ghosts?" A few aides chuckled nervously, unsure if it was a joke or the beginning of something worse. Minister Patel managed a tight smile. Havisham said nothing. Marlowe didn't respond. She took 2 measured steps toward him. No reply at all. Stillness. Then his voice came, low, controlled, stripped of anything except fact. "Orders come from the Crown, Your Majesty, through proper command structure." The words landed with precision that didn't need volume. Camilla blinked. Behind her, the Culture Secretary's eyebrows lifted slightly. There was no disrespect in what he'd said, just clarity. And somehow that made it worse. Before she could respond, one of the younger aides whispered to a colleague, not quietly enough, "Well, that's awkward." That was all it took. Camilla's expression tightened. She glanced back, not at the aide who'd spoken, but at the others. The ministers, the staff, the ones who had just watched her try to assert authority and watched him deflect it with 6 words and perfect military bearing. She stepped closer to the archway. "You'll find," she said, voice dropping into something colder, "that I am the Crown today." The words hung there, heavy and uncomfortable. Marlowe's eyes didn't shift. His chin didn't lift. His fingers remained motionless around the rifle. He simply held the line, shoulders back, jaw set, boots planted exactly where they were supposed to be. He gave her nothing. And that silence, meant to signal discipline and obedience, read to her like defiance wrapped in protocol. She stood there for several seconds longer, waiting. For him to blink, or shift his weight, or acknowledge her in some way that would let her reclaim control of the moment. But the only movement came from a gust of wind that lifted the edge of her coat and sent a few dead leaves skittering across the wet stone. Then she turned sharply on her heel and rejoined the delegation. Her expression was neutral, professionally so. But her stride was faster now. Aides scrambled to match her pace. The tour resumed. But something had shifted. The wound wasn't visible yet, but it had been opened. And before the hour was done, it would bleed. The hallway echoed with polite conversation as the group moved under an arched mural depicting some long-dead monarch's coronation. Staff stood at marked intervals, ready with rehearsed commentary about portraiture, Commonwealth partnerships, the Queen Consort's charitable work. But the atmosphere had changed. Camilla's stride was tight, controlled, but sharp, like she was walking just a little too fast to be comfortable. Her jaw moved slightly as she chewed the inside of her cheek. She heard the words people were saying around her, but retained none of them. The image of that motionless guard kept replaying behind her eyes, not hostile, not insolent, just still. But it was what that stillness had done, how it had left her exposed in front of her own guests. That wouldn't stop burning. Near the tapestry from Queen Victoria's reign, Havisham and the Culture Secretary shared a quiet laugh about something. Nothing inappropriate, just the kind of polite chuckle that fills space during diplomatic tours. But Camilla heard it, and her mind immediately leapt backward, connecting it to what had just happened at the arch. She turned abruptly to her senior aide. "Has the sergeant been reassigned yet?" The man blinked. "Reassigned, ma'am? The guard, Marlowe, at the North Arch." He hesitated, glancing at his tablet. "He's on full-day ceremonial rotation, Your Majesty. His post doesn't end until 1700 hours. Camilla's eyes narrowed. "Get someone to relieve him." "Ma'am, I'd need clearance from—" "Now, Mr. Kincaid." He bowed slightly, already stepping aside to make the call, though the look on his face suggested he knew this wasn't going to end well. But Camilla wasn't waiting for his concerns. She turned without another word and started retracing her steps toward the courtyard. The delegation hesitated. Havisham followed after a beat, more out of obligation than understanding. Minister Patel stayed where she was, casting a wary glance at a nearby photographer who instinctively lowered his camera. Camilla's heels struck the floor faster now, sharper. By the time she reached the archway again, the guard hadn't moved. Of course he hadn't. Still as stone, still at post, rain-soaked but unshaken. "Sergeant," she said, and this time there was nothing light about her tone. Marlowe didn't react. She stepped into the damp threshold, just inside the ceremonial boundary marked by rope and brass posts. "Lower your weapon, that's an order." A faint gust of wind passed through the open courtyard. Somewhere in the distance, a camera shutter clicked once. He didn't move. "Do you defy your queen?" she asked, louder now. There was a pause, long enough that you could hear the rain tapping against stone. Then his voice came again, smooth as polished steel. "I serve the king and the crown, ma'am. Protocol forbids deviation under civilian request." The word civilian landed like a slap delivered in silk gloves. Her face twitched. A ripple of discomfort passed through the small group behind her. Havisham coughed once into his fist, suddenly fascinated by the architecture. An aide studied his shoes. Camilla's voice dropped, quieter, but more venomous. "This isn't about protocol anymore, is it?" Marlowe didn't answer, but his stillness was the answer, and standing there, rain touching the edges of her heels, camera lenses peeking from behind stone pillars, Camilla made a decision. She would not be defied. Not here. Not by a soldier. Not by anyone. Camilla stepped closer. She crossed the threshold slowly, deliberately, until she was standing less than a foot from Sergeant Marlowe. The mist in the air had left a sheen across his red tunic, but the colour hadn't dulled. His jaw, square, weathered, marked by that pale scar along the bone, bore the same quiet resistance that had mocked her from 20 feet away. But now she was here, close enough to see the individual threads in his uniform, close enough that her breath fogged slightly in the cold air between them. "Then, perhaps," she said, voice trembling at the edge of rage she could barely contain, "this will teach you what service actually means." The movement wasn't sudden. It was controlled, surgical even. She leaned forward and spat. The sound hit first. A wet snap against fabric and skin. It struck his cheek, caught the edge of the white chin strap, darkened a line of scarlet wool just below his collar. No scream, no flinch, no gasp from the guard. But behind her, the silence shattered. One of the aides physically recoiled, hand flying up like he'd been the one struck. Havisham muttered something under his breath. Sounded like "good God," but he turned away too fast to be sure. A young press assistant's hand shot to her mouth, eyes wide. The photographers who'd been hovering at the edge of the square didn't lift their cameras, not this time. They lowered them, instead, instinctively, almost reverently. Even scandal has limits. Marlowe's head turned slightly with the impact. Not much, just enough that you could trace the direction, just enough that his cheekbone caught the weak light where saliva had landed and started to run. Then he moved, but not the way anyone expected. No words, no breakdown, no retaliation. He pivoted. One clean, mechanical step, military precision drilled into muscle memory over years, and he turned his body exactly 180 degrees. His back was now to the Queen Consort. The motion was textbook, the kind of manoeuvre performed in front of heads of state, foreign dignitaries, and hostile crowds. Guards had done it for centuries in moments of ceremony, discipline, and, on rare occasions, protection. But now it was being used to protect something else. Not the palace, not the public. The uniform itself. From her. Camilla stood frozen. In front of her now wasn't a face, wasn't the challenge of eye contact, just a perfectly pressed red backplate. A soldier's skin held rigid by honour, not orders. "Turn back," she snapped. "That's an order." No response. "Turn back and face me." Still nothing. Her pulse ticked visibly in her neck. Behind her, the square was dead silent except for the rain. A pigeon flapped from one ledge to another, startling someone, but no one else moved. No one spoke. "I said, turn around!" Her voice cracked on the last word. The anger no longer polished or controlled, just raw. Still, Marlowe didn't budge. His silence wasn't passive anymore. It had become something else. A mirror. And standing in front of it, Camilla could see exactly what she'd done. "You insolent little—" The words came out sharp and ugly, stripped of the careful polish she usually wrapped around her anger. But they didn't land the way she wanted. No heads bowed in her defense. No aides rushed to smooth things over. No one even pretended not to notice, because everyone was already frozen, watching something that had stepped outside the boundaries of protocol and into territory no one knew how to navigate. She lurched forward half a step, trying to move around his side, as if physically reclaiming her authority through proximity alone. But Marlowe turned again, same precision, same economy of movement, presenting his back once more. He wasn't retreating, wasn't running. He was shielding her from himself, and in doing that, shielding the institution from what she'd just done. "No, you do not turn your back on me." Her voice pitched higher, hollowing out into something shrill. "You do not move without my permission. I am—" The sentence broke apart before she could finish it. The courtyard didn't echo with outrage, it echoed with embarrassment, the kind that grows not from anger, but from watching someone lose control in real time. Lord Havisham turned away completely, adjusting his overcoat like the fabric suddenly needed urgent attention. Two press officers quietly stepped back behind the stone pillars, putting architecture between themselves and whatever this was becoming. Camilla's aides exchanged glances, tight throats, lowered eyes, the universal body language of people who desperately wished they were somewhere else. One of them, younger and newer to the job, murmured into his earpiece, "Get corridor security to North Arch, now, immediate." Camilla didn't notice. She was too deep in it. Her fists clenched at her sides, her face flushed. "Turn around, I command you!" The guard remained with his back to her, rain beading on his shoulders, posture perfect, silent. The rain picked up slightly, soft and steady now, dampening the hem of her coat and tapping against the stones overhead. She spun toward the few people still standing within earshot. Havisham, two aides, a stunned assistant to the Lord Chamberlain, who just arrived at the edge of the square and immediately regretted it. "Call security," she snapped, "right now!" And then a voice, low, clear, calm, but so unexpected that it stopped her mid-breath. "That won't be necessary." It came from behind them all, from the western corridor. Bootsteps followed, slow, measured, certain, as King Charles emerged from the covered walkway, flanked by no one. He wasn't supposed to be on this side of the palace for another hour. His schedule had him in meetings until midday, but the message had come through. The aide's text had been too specific to ignore. "You'll want to see this yourself, sir." So now he was here, dark navy overcoat, silver cufflinks catching the grey light, no ceremonial anything, but somehow carrying more weight than the building around him. His eyes moved across the scene slowly, taking in each piece. His wife, flushed and trembling, his guard, soaked but steady, his guests, embarrassed and silent. The king's gaze settled on the red smear along Marlowe's jaw, then travelled slowly back to Camilla. What precisely occurred? The question didn't need volume, because everyone standing in that courtyard already knew the answer. And only one person still hoped it could be explained away. No one answered right away. The courtyard had lost its rhythm entirely, where moments ago there'd been voices, movement, the background hum of staff managing an event. Now everything hung suspended beneath the presence of the monarch. Even the rain seemed quieter, as if receding behind the weight of that single question. What precisely occurred? King Charles's gaze shifted between them. First to the guests, Havisham still refusing eye contact, Minister Patel hovering just out of direct line of sight, aides with expressions like drawn curtains. Then to Camilla, standing rigid, her hands twitching slightly at her sides. And finally to Marlowe. The guard still stood with his back to the Queen Consort, shoulders squared, rain soaking steadily into the red wool. The damp mark of her spit had begun to blur slightly along his jaw, no longer fresh but unmistakable, a stain, physical and symbolic. Charles took one step forward. "Camilla?" She opened her mouth, closed it, swallowed, then forced the words out. He turned his back on me, in front of government officials, ignored direct commands, showed complete disrespect for— "I see," Charles said quietly. And before he turned his back, she hesitated. "I requested a posture adjustment for the photographs." He refused. Then he turned away. I ordered him to stop. He refused again. The king said nothing. His face gave away nothing, but his hands hung still at his sides, unfolded, quiet. Then Marlowe's voice came, clear, even, unshaken. "Her Majesty commanded a breach of standing ceremonial protocol. I maintained regulation bearing under oath. I did not engage verbally. My posture changed only after an act of personal assault." The word settled over the stones like frost. Assault. Camilla stiffened. "That is, he's exaggerating what—" Charles raised one hand. His gaze moved to the tunic, to the faint, half-dried smear against the scarlet fabric. "Is that your doing, Camilla?" Silence. Even the aides stopped breathing. She blinked once. "It wasn't— He provoked. Is that your doing?" The repetition was colder, final. She didn't answer, and she didn't need to. King Charles turned slightly toward the guests and staff, still lingering at the edges. "Clear the quadrangle." The command was quiet, but absolute. No one questioned it. Havisham moved immediately, shepherding Minister Patel toward the covered corridor. Aides followed, some too quickly, like they needed distance. The photographers who'd stayed silent through everything retreated without a word, cameras lowered. Within 30 seconds, it was only the three of them. The king, the Queen Consort, and the silent guard. Charles approached Marlowe first. "Sergeant, you may return to your forward facing." Marlowe pivoted once, precise, controlled, returning to his original stance. Rifle grounded, chin forward, eyes fixed straight ahead. His face remained expressionless, but the dried stain now faced the crown again. Charles studied him for a long moment. Then he looked at his wife. "What you've done here," he said, voice low, but cutting through the rain like steel, "is not a breach of decorum." Camilla's breath caught. "It's a breach of legacy." He let the words settle, let them sink into the stone and the silence and the rain. Then he spoke again. "I'll deal with it." And in that moment, Camilla understood. She hadn't just lost her temper, she'd lost the room, and the king wasn't going to protect her from that. The rain had softened to barely more than mist now, thin streaks tracing down the glass of the north corridor windows where cold light fell across ancient stone. Inside the quadrangle, King Charles stood alone with his wife and the guard, one man unmoving, one woman unravelling, and one sovereign caught between silence and principle. He didn't look at Camilla right away. He looked at Marlowe. "Sergeant," he said, voice measured, but carrying the kind of authority that doesn't need volume. "You've acted within the strict letter of your orders, but more than that, you've honoured their spirit." Marlowe didn't reply. His stillness was answer enough, earned, deserved. Charles turned to Camilla. "The guards do not serve personality," he said quietly. "They serve the crown." She opened her mouth. "Charles," he deliberately— But he held up one hand, not to silence her, to cut through the noise of excuses before they could take root. "You spat on a uniform," he said, voice flat and factual. "A uniform that answers to 3 centuries of history before it answers to us." She stepped forward, just half a pace. "He humiliated me in front of—" "No," Charles said, firmer now. "You humiliated yourself." Her breath stopped. He didn't fill the silence. He let it stretch, heavy and final, echoing off stone and soaked wool. The kind of silence that doesn't come from uncertainty, but from judgment already rendered. Then he turned back to Marlowe. "I apologize on behalf of this institution," he said, with the weight of a funeral bell. "You are to remain at post." And finally, to her, "You will withdraw." The words landed cold, final. Camilla blinked. For a second it looked like she might refuse. Her chin lifted just slightly, as if pride alone could hold the moment together. But there was nothing beneath it now. The press was gone. The guests were gone. The aides had vanished. It was just them. And what had been done? Her shoes clicked once against the floor, then again. She turned without a word, the wet hem of her coat dragging faintly against the flagstone as she disappeared into the western passage. She didn't look back, didn't speak, and no one followed her. Charles stood beside Marlowe for a moment longer, not apologizing anymore, just standing there in respect. Then he adjusted his cuff, turned, and departed through the side gallery without another word. He didn't need to say anything else. Everything that mattered had already been said, and the guard remained, unmoved, holding not just a rifle, but the line itself. The courtyard settled back into its rhythm. There were no words left, no whispers, no camera clicks, no trailing footsteps across wet stone, just the soft return of rain finding its usual place, light, steady, cleansing. Sergeant Thorne Marlowe stood exactly where he'd been posted. The faint stain on his collar, though no longer fresh, still marked the fabric. He hadn't touched it, wouldn't, not while the duty remained active. Through the archway, a junior guardsman appeared at the far end of the square for the scheduled rotation. He paused halfway across the stones, saw the king's shadow disappearing down the far corridor, and said nothing. Just straightened his own buttons and carried on, because that's what the service required. Inside the palace, staff began moving again. Quiet conversations resumed, schedules realigned. No one said it out loud, but everyone understood. Something had broken today, and something else had held. At the edge of the courtyard, beneath the carved stone crest of the crown, King Charles passed by once more on his way back to the private wing. He didn't stop, but he slowed. And just before stepping under the arch, he gave the smallest gesture a monarch could give, a single nod, barely visible, not a command, not protocol, just acknowledgement. Then he was gone behind the glass doors. Marlowe blinked once, not from the rain, but because the moment had passed and the duty remained. He reached slowly to the corner of his tunic and with the edge of one glove wiped away the last trace of the mark. Then he recentered his stance, rifle grounded, chin up, eyes forward. Rain rolled down the barrel like glass beads on a string. The clock at the far wall chimed once, midday. The next shift was still hours away, but for Sergeant Marlowe it made no difference. His post hadn't moved, and neither had he. If you were in Sergeant Marlowe's position, would you have stayed silent, or would you have turned your back the same way he did? And do you think King Charles made the right call by siding with the guard in front of everyone, or should he have handled it privately? Drop your thoughts below, hit subscribe and turn on notifications, and share this if you believe respect isn't something you demand, it's something you earn. Our next story is already on your screen. Click it now, and we'll see you tomorrow. Same time, same place.